It's Dr. Tennant's Verbal Highs. Let's start the show with Lewis Tennant. Here we go. Guests and interviews that you're looking for with creators, innovators, and so much more. For all episodes and further info, verbalhighs.com is the place to go.
Welcome. That was a bit. Welcome to Dr. Tennant's Verbal Highs, a podcast podcasted weekly from a kitchen bench in Kingsland, Auckland, New Zealand. My name is Lewis Tennant, and I forgot to mention last week that the Doctor and Dr. Tennant's Verbal Highs could have been a little bit of a ruse, just like when you Google is Dr. Dre, at least in New Zealand anyway, the first thing the drop-down menu is Dr. Dre really a doctor? And I wasn't really a doctor until about 10 days ago. Handed in the old thesis in March, went through the Viva, which is the oral examination with your examiners who've already independently read it, the three of them. Did the changes, which is the next thing you do. They say do this, do that, do this, do that, and you get it whittled down and so on and so forth. But the actual ceremony wasn't until Wednesday the week before last. Had my grandmother up from Wellington, had my folks there. Watched a bunch of students that I taught, 3 years ago, because I don't generally teach third year papers. A bunch of students I taught 3 years ago. Graduate, remembered some faces I hadn't remembered. Felt a huge sense of pride, and then they bunged the PhD people on at the end, of which there were 3 and I was 1. It was quite an emotional day, I realised at the end, for all of those reasons. And it was a lovely sense of closure, a lovely sense of achievement. But more importantly now, don't sue me because I'm calling myself doctor and I'm not. Can you sue people for that? Because I am now. Got a piece of paper and everything. Folded under the chair leg. The chair was wobbly. So that was great. A little bit of, trumpet blowing. It's bloody hard, mate. Long time doing that. That's a trumpet or blow. So welcome to week 6. I can't believe we're a month and a half in. I've got to say a huge thank you. I don't quite know how to read these analytics statistics on my web provider's website and also Google Analytics. It's very frustrating that neither of them measure streams or downloads, which you think would be quite important, really, for a podcaster. And iTunes don't give the figures either. You kind of either get into their charts or you don't. So sort of flying a little blind. But if I look at my unique subscribers to my RSS feed, so in other words, that's anyone who's linked up to me to get the subscription through a podcast service, particularly iTunes, or has used the RSS button on my site. So in other words, those of you that have subscribed, I was actually quite amazed, because this is a hobby at the end of the day, to see there's 224 people subscribing. So thank you. And thank you to everyone else listening, because that also fills me with hope in that I have listened to thousands of hours of podcasts, particularly in the last 2 years, and I don't think I'm subscribed to any. So I know there's different ways of listening. So that's a good sign for December. December 224. Fantastic. Recording this intro early today. I like to do them on the day that the podcast gets released, but it's Christmas. It's the silly season, eh? So I thought I'd get in today, which is Friday before Christmas, the day before Christmas Eve. I don't know if it has a name. This podcast will be released on the day after Boxing Day. I don't know if that has a name either. So sandwiched in between you guys getting this and me recording this intro will hopefully be a lovely Christmas for all of you. Hopefully nothing gnarly will happen in the world and that I have to re-record this. Hopefully it'll be peace, love and merriment all round. Having a lovely, easy Christmas this year. Over to the folks' place. We don't do gifts. We haven't done for years. If you want an easy, stress-free Christmas, folks, buy for the kids in your family. Stop buying presents for each other as adults. I don't go out into that mad world the week beforehand. I don't get a bunch of stuff that's maybe not ideal. I don't buy stuff for people that's maybe not ideal. Hey, if it works for you, it works, but it's been great doing that ever since. I wasn't sold when it was first mooted, when I hit about 13 or 14, but it's made more sense the older I get. So I'm just looking forward to spending time with those significant around me, and I hope you get to enjoy the same. Now to my guest. This week I think this guest really sums up one of the main spirits or objectives or ideas I had around the podcast, which is it may just be that the first 5 guests have had what you'd vaguely call a media prominence. But this gentleman comes to me as, what did I say in my blurb? I wanted to chat to sort of interesting and innovative people who've achieved something perhaps out of the ordinary. And my guest has, in that he's taken a hobby to amazing extremes. And between his property in Pukekohe with a purpose-built room and an apartment in town with another 10 of what I'm about to talk about casually strewn around, or 8, sorry, I don't know the exact numbers, Mr. Dave Peck owns 125 pinball machines. You think about that, pinball lover or not, think about the size of those suckers. And having at least 100 and 110 and spread over one main room and another room in one place and then 10 somewhere else. It's amazing. And as a player, I was gobsmacked when I first came across Dave's collection and the other collections around Auckland. I was invited into this weird underground secret world via an old acquaintance who added me on Facebook. We've since become good friends again. Simon down in Wellington, who used to run the pinball at Midnight Espresso. For those of you who remember, there was always a very good title in there, a good machine in there. So I've been connected to a whole lot of collectors, and we have competitions and general get-togethers around pinball up in Auckland quite regularly, which has been one of the most enjoyable things that's been sprung on me in the last few years. I really look forward to it. I only used to go to the big comps. I don't want to push my luck too much, but these guys, all gracious hosts, suddenly turned around to me a few years in and said, "Hey, why don't you come to the monthlies?" And now I'm like a bad smell. And these monthlies, as we'll talk about in the podcast, are linked to a worldwide competitive circuit called the IFPA, I think it is. So I have a world ranking. I'm not sure what that is. And without a machine of my own, I'm quite proud to say, I say in the podcast, I think I'm 30-something in New Zealand out of about 300 registered players. I had a look up of that figure. I'm actually 27th. Woohoo! And Dave is number 1. We talk about going to the World Champs, which he's done a few times. And just finally, so you can let the podcast reveal itself, I talk a lot with him about the business side of things. That's because one of the kind of short blurbs I had before chatting to him was that he was a semi-retired entrepreneur at what I think I've deduced as the age of 45 through little snippets throughout the podcast. So I wanted to know how one does that, considering on a bad week I'm looking for a change for a latte in the couch. And so we kind of got there, but what was clarified to me after we got off the mics is the furniture stuff we talk about was a bunch of furniture Dave was designing, then getting made overseas, and then putting into large stores around Auckland that were under his own brand called Best Buys. And I think there might have been some throughout New Zealand, and then that's led on to an interest in developing things like a business park that's out in Puki and so on. And so that might have some relation to owning 125 pennies. But you know what? They're not hidden away. We have up to 100 people on the big meets, I think 80 to 100. So it's been great coming through and being welcomed into houses like the Pecks. Okay, so I'll leave you with Mr. Dave Peck, pinball aficionado, number 1 ranked pinball player in New Zealand, semi-retired entrepreneur, and heavy metal aficionado.
This is Dr. Tannen's Verbal Highs.
Shut up, Lewis. With me, I have semi-retired entrepreneur, property developer, metal aficionado, known to his friends as Encyclopedia Metallica. I might have to test you on that. That title in a second, and probably most poignantly for today, in terms of my selfish motives for getting you in, pinball collector and owner of the most pinball machines in New Zealand, Mr. Dave Peck. Hi.
Good morning, Lewis.
Hi. So, how many is it now?
Pinballs? Jeez. I think I lost count at 100, Lewis, but my collection on Pinside tells me 127 pinball machines.
So where does that put you? Not that it's about size and who's got the most.
Lewis, it's always about size, mate. That's what it's all about.
Yeah. How does that rank compared to worldwide collections? So because before you answer that, the first time I saw your collection, I think even if someone wasn't a hopeless pinball fan like myself, it's just quite an amazing, I guess, kind of thing to see for anyone aesthetically, that amount of machines. So how does that sort of collection rate compared to others in the world?
It's up there for a private guy. I've been to a few around the world. I went to one guy's place in Germany, and when we went to the World Champs in 2013, and we got invited to a guy's place. He's a very successful chicken farmer, of all things.
Yeah.
He's got a huge chicken farm just outside of Frankfurt. And you don't get invited there very often. It's mainly just for his own enjoyment. And he's got converted 2 of his chicken sheds into huge pinball halls, and he had 300 and something machines there. And he has a full-time guy employed to look after the things because, as you know, pinball machines always break down.
Yeah.
So that was the thing. It was 4 rows of 75 machines end to end. So
75, so 4, so 100, 300.
Yeah, 300. That was in one hall, and then he had his overflow in another hall. So I reckon, which were, like I say, converted chicken sheds, which were done quite nicely, but big long rows of pinball machines. So once you see something like that, that's probably the most impressive thing I've seen. I went to another guy's place called John Weeks. He's got he owns what's a retired airport in Banning in California. We went there earlier this year, and he's got about 800 pinball machines all set up, and he's trying to set up a pinball museum there in Banning, which is probably about 90 minutes out of Los Angeles, and just by, what's that place, Palm Springs, not far from Palm Springs, and that's very impressive. He's also got 350 Space Invaders machines as well, so that's pretty impressive when you go in there and have that whole place to yourself.
Insane. And the first thing that struck me when I went in is compared to, even as a kid I'm actually a little bit young for the technical golden age of arcade or whatever, but I'm not far off. I was a kind of mid-'80s in the arcades kid.
Mm-hmm.
Is even back then you didn't see that much kind of video game machinery in one room. So I remember the first time I went to Willie's, which was before yours, another large connection in Auckland, folks just going, oh my freaking God. How did this even happen, especially in whenever it was 2011, 2012. So how did it happen? Because I'll tell you this, I did a little bit of my study touched on collectors, and so I've got some at least points of trivia, and they say that 1/3 of adults collect something, and I would probably guess that there's probably heaps more kids that at some stage collect something. So where did it come from? Were you a collector as a kid?
I think walking into anyone's collection of anything is always impressive, whether it be Space Invaders machines or pinball machines or guitars. Or, I've been to a lot of guys who collect lots of weird things,
Yeah.
But when you walk in and see a whole lot of pinball machines all plugged in and lit up and looking sexy, it always is pretty impressive, whether it's 10 or 100.
So where did it come from?
Well, the first got into it back. If we travel right back in the time machine to, I'm slightly older than you, so we.
How old are you?
40 something, closer to 40 than 50, I think.
Okay,
yeah, so a little bit older than you.
Yeah.
So we might delve into in one of your previous podcasts. You said men in their 40s reminiscing about the 90s.
Yeah. Well, here we are with pinball.
Let's talk about the 80s instead. So going back to. I was raised in Pukekohe, which was, it's all very much part of the super city now, but back in the day it was very much, it may as well have been Otrahonga, it was a long way out of town, and the Great Divide, so there wasn't never much happening out in Pukekohe. So in the school holidays, me and all my mates would saddle up in the road services bus, pay our $2 or whatever, and get the bus into town, which took about 2 hours.
The big smoke.
Into the big smoke. That's the one. You get in the old shitty Bedfords with the 4-speed gearbox and the gear stick that threw about 2 foot every gear change.
Yeah.
And would whip into town. And back in those days, we're talking, I suppose the early mid 80s, 83, 84, 85, because I don't know if I'd let my daughter go into town from Pukekohe at her
No,
age.
it was
you know?
it was a different era.
Yep.
It was a different era.
Different
and
times,
yeah, that's right. Latchkey kids. That's our era.
And saying that,
Send them out. You go, when will you be home? Oh, when it gets dark.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, very much that way, yeah.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we'd just say to her, hey, Mum, we're going to the city to play Space Invaders. Okay, see you later, bye. And we'd sort of get home about 6 or 7 o'clock, you know. But, yeah, the city back in those days was, totally different than it is now. But we'd get in there, get off down at what's Brito Mart now, which used to be the old round bus barn place, where you buses, the bus terminus, I think they used to call it. It was a bit like the Walking Dead terminus.
Yeah.
And we'd get up there, and then we had a little course we'd go on. So the first place you go to would be Wizards, which is around very close to where I think Mermaids is now.
That was still there through until the 90s, I think.
Yep,
My memories of coming up to Auckland.
It would be, yeah, certainly late 80s anyway. And you'd go to Wizards, and you had up at the top of Queen Street where the St James is, you had downstairs, you had Space World, which was sort of the biggest official arcade, and I think it was tied in with Carriage Odeon ran it, because they owned all the cinemas. There was the 4 cinemas above it.
Were they quite grimy back then? Because growing up in Wellington, we'd frequent them just to play video games, but they stunk of glue, like there's
Well, Wellington's always been a bit that way, Lewis,
come on.
Yes and no.
So they were upstanding family entertainment centres in the 80s.
That was certainly how Space World was done, being that I think, like I say, I'm pretty sure it was under the Carriage Odeon sort of banner.
Yeah.
And they ran it, had like, fancy carpet with, planets and that on it, whereas it was certainly that step above what any other arcade was, but that place was pretty flash. You went down the stairs, and it was all filled with mainly in New Zealand was always more about Space Invaders than pinball machines, and that's what we were all about.
Yeah, always a maximum of I remember probably 3 or 4 pinballs at most in a lot of those places.
Definitely, yeah. The especially back in those days, back in the 80s, with New Zealand's import laws. The way that it used to be, certainly back in the 60s and 70s, and under Muldoon in the 70s and early 80s, was very much anything that came into New Zealand was taxed up the wazoo, which is why we used to make colour TVs in New Zealand.
That's right. That's why it was really hard to even get. Air hostesses used to bring in records for radio hierarchy hosts and so on.
Exactly,
so
right.
It was so hard to get anything in. Smuggling music.
Yeah, it's the only way to go, Lewis. So, if you go back to the Space Invaders era, that's why all those cabinets in New Zealand, if you see second-hand Space Invaders machines these days, they're always in those brown Maltika cabinets, because the way they used to do it to get around the import laws was they used to make the cabinets in New Zealand, the tubes were made in New Zealand, but they used to bring the boards in from Japan. So
would that be like, because X percentage of it was made here, it technically counts as manufactured here?
Well, yeah, it's made in New Zealand.
I never knew that.
The only thing they imported was the board set, and the board set, whatever that cost, might have cost $300 or $400 or something. But so that was, and all the rest of it was made in New Zealand, so there's no import duty on things made in New Zealand. So I think the import duty back in those days on a lot of items was 200 or 300%. It was insane. So
we kind of lived in a sort of Soviet era Russia in a lot of ways with the economic side
very
of things.
Very much so, and
very protectionist,
And when Mr. Longy came along and Mr. Roger Douglas came along in the later 80s and took all that protection away, hey everyone, now you can get a really nice colour TV for $900, but half your mates haven't got a job anymore. So it's bit of philosophy there on the Pinball podcast. But so a double-edged sword there. But as we watch our cheap colour TVs and listen to our cheap iPhones, then we can thank Roger Douglas for that, I guess. But so you pinball.
So you were that's the main thing I wanted to get at you, because there's people who were kind of arcade kids and who weren't,
Mm-hmm.
So you were someone who kind of went and hung out at the arcade, because it was probably one of our principal forms of entertainment back then, right?
To be honest, there was fuck all else to do, Lewis.
Yeah.
So
I was there. I wasn't far off.
So you'd cadge up your 20 senses, and the better you were, the longer your 20 cents would last. So that was the main genesis for getting good at anything, was making your 20 cents go further, because in the 80s, 20 cents was a lot of money,
Relative to age as well.
Of course,
Crystal City, opposite what was then Pigeon Park, now Tiaro Park, middle of Wellington. Can you picture where I mean? Around Dixon Street?
Yep.
Yeah, there was a boy that used to, probably looked like a man to me at the time, who I swear must have gone in about 10 in the morning and put his 20 cents into Hyper Olympics, and he'd still be there. Still be there at 3 in the afternoon.
Now
that's a game you can just get into a loop.
30 years later, he's probably got really bad RSI from that game.
Yeah, and night terrors from seeing that javelin just over and over and over.
That's right.
In his head. And so you said there weren't a lot of kind of pins around then, and it is. I think it's not more specific, but it's very definite kind of collecting style off into video games. Although a lot of people I know in our circles collect both. But what sparked the sort of pinball thing?
Well, the pinball thing came along for me a lot earlier, though I did used to play pinball, and the reason there wasn't a lot of pinballs around is because they never assembled pinball machines in New Zealand, and so there wasn't a lot of them around back then until after the late 80s, when they changed the import laws and it became a lot more affordable to bring them in, because of course people...
right, so there was suddenly more of them on the ground.
That's
here.
right, yeah. So the big boom in pinball in New Zealand was really more at the late 80s, early 90s, which is why in New Zealand, if you're in the market for a second-hand pinball machine, most of the ones you'll see will be early 90s machines. Like there's a lot of Jurassic Parks and Lethal Weapon 3s and machines of that era around, because the guys were bringing them in bulk. And before that, the older machines that are from the 70s and 80s, which I have a lot of at my house, there's not a lot of them around in New Zealand, and I've had to bring them in from America and import them in containers myself. So that's one of the main reasons you don't see... Well, back in those days, you didn't see a lot of machines around.
So why did people even bother getting them in all the way back then? Is that because if you could actually get one and it was really lucrative to have them out on site because there were so few of them?
Well, I think, like any business, it's all about ROI, your return on investment. So
Yeah.
if back in those days, if you were buying a new Space Invaders machine for, whatever they were back then, $1,500 or something like that, there's stories I've heard, with the amount of 20 cents that were going in those Space Invaders machines, that you'd have to clear the money box twice a day.
Yeah.
There'd literally be hundreds of dollars coming in a week, and your machine would be paid for, within a month or two. Your machine was paid for, and everything else on top of it is gravy. So
No, I mean the pinball rather than the video games.
yeah,
If it was that much of a hassle, why did operators bother?
I think that was
Because the hen's teeth thing made them more lucrative again.
I think pinball's always done well, but the reality was, for your whatever a pinball machine cost back then, probably $3,000 or $4,000, you could buy 4 Space Invaders machines and make more money out of it. So, but people would still always have a pinball machine, because it does always. The more things you can have in your arcade, the more money you'll get at the end of the day.
Adds different shapes to the room as well.
It does, and people have always enjoyed. I remember going back, my earliest experience with pinball machines was, well, obviously you see the Fonz playing them on Happy Days and things like that. It always does have that element of cool around it. I don't know if I bring any of that to the table, Lewis, but we can certainly dream.
Hang on, and that's right. So sorry, we still haven't got to. I'm good at this. It's basically an hour and a quarter of me sidetracking people. So yeah, how did you get the bug to actually get one out of an arcade and into the house?
Well, the first my history was, our family had when I was a child in the 70s, my father bought a second-hand shop in Pukekohe. That was one of the reasons we went down. We had a grocery shop first, a Foursquare, which back in those days was a good business, because the supermarkets weren't open 7 days. After a couple of years of that, he got an opportunity to buy into a second-hand shop, and he bought that, and that became our family business. So he built that up from a little one-man band to probably the biggest second-hand shop in New Zealand. So as us children left school, we all went and worked in the second-hand shop. And so that's where my business history started. And, of course, always loving pinballs and more so Space Invaders back in those days. One day I went along to an auction of some arcade had gone bust. Would have been about 87, I would think, somewhere around that sort of age. And I ended up buying half a dozen Space Invaders machines. And I was still living at home at that stage, so imagine my mother's horror when she comes home and her lounge is filled with Space Invaders machines. So we had a Ghost and Goblins and a Time Pilot and a four-player
half
gauntlet.
the arcade.
Half the arcade. I was buying,
and you're like mid-teens or something?
Yeah, I was 15, 16, something like that. So between me and my brother's a couple of years younger, my second brother's 2 years younger than me, and I've got a younger brother as well, who's New Zealand's leading magician, but that's another story.
Well, so at the time, that's the spot to be on the block out of the houses, because it was far less common to have them inside the house.
Yeah, very, very much so. I suppose there always has been people who've had them in their house, but for for teenagers to have them in their house, and I can't remember what I was paying for these things, but probably a couple $100 each or something. They weren't. I don't remember them being outlandishly expensive. So I had all those in the house. And the problem with with arcade machines is they do get a little bit boring after a while. So all your mates can come around and play them, but after a while, if you can only get past 6 levels on Donkey Kong, then it becomes reasonably tedious. So fast forward a couple of years, I was probably about 89-ish. And there was a pizza shop in Pukekohe, a little pizza shop he was in a little bit of an out-of-the-way place, and he had an old pinball machine in there, and he went bust. So the second-hand shop, being me, trundled up there and bought all his worldly possessions, and one of them was a pinball machine. And we bought it for, me and my brother bought that for, I think from memory, $100 or $150, and it didn't work. And it was a Gottlieb Solar City, which is 1977 electromechanical machine, and it didn't work, so I get it home, and I've always been a fiddly fingers, so I prodded around with it for a while and got it going, and so that was my first ever pinball machine at 17.
Can you remember that far back to what was wrong with it?
I think from memory, my repair schedule in those days was spray everything with CRC and eventually it'll work. So it's a wonder I didn't catch the thing on fire looking back now, but it worked. I eventually got it going, so obviously it can't have been too much wrong with it.
Got to grease those joints.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, it was the first rule of pinball now, as we know now, is don't spray CRC anywhere near your machines, but I'm sure I put a couple of cans worth of CRC into it and somehow it magically worked.
And so did that hold more... Did that hold more interest than Donkey Kong in 6 levels?
It did. So yeah, the Donkey Kongs and that they were still in the house at that stage, and the pinball was relevant. I had my band going at that stage because the band thing was going at that stage, and so the musicians it was in the garage because it didn't work. So we had a barn on the property where we lived, and so we had it out. And the musicians practiced in the barn with the pinball machine. We'd always have a go, and then. About a year or two later, I got another machine, which is F14 Tomcat, which is a machine...
So we're up to 2 now. I'm counting until we get to 115.
That's right. Well, that's going to be a long podcast. I've only got 2 hours parking, Lewis. So, yeah, that was the first machine.
There's some real nerd out there writing these down as we go. Okay, so Dave got... Hang on, what was the second one?
Solar City was the first one. And that was the only machine in my entire life that I regret selling. I had it for a few years.
The first one?
Yeah, the first one, yes.
Is it because it's hard to find now?
Yeah, and it's a really, really good game. And at the time, I didn't, there was no internet or anything. Yeah. So
trade and exchange every week.
That's
hopeful glance.
I was. That's exactly what it was. Yeah, trade and exchange. Go to the news agents or the garage, the mobile on Thursday morning. Get the trade and exchange. Get in the truck and go out and buy second-hand furniture and hopefully some pinball machines.
I got my first and only ever game actually at an auction. You were talking about auctions before. And I recognised him. He was the guy who had an arcade up the road from me. I didn't realise he'd owned the machines. Obviously, he owned the pinball. In fact, maybe looking back, he was a bit sketchy. Maybe he was selling something that someone else had cited.
Could well be.
Anyway, so I was the only one to put my hand up to bid for it, much to the sort of chuckling of all these people around me at the auction, 20 years older than me. So I approached him at the end of the auction and offered him a cash price, and we went downstairs into a little whisper. And I said, okay, I'll give you that money, but only if you deliver it. And we were 3 floors up on Willis Street in the middle of town, which if you come during rush hour is a real hassle. But
yes,
we got it up there. Jeremy and I actually in one of my first flats. And it's scoffed at now. It was a Street Fighter. But hey, we had a pinball in our flat.
It's
it's always a point of interest to people who don't even play it. There's something about them that most people are drawn to when they see them in a room.
It still is reasonably unusual for someone to have like a jukebox or a pinball machine.
I forget that now that I know you guys.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you take it for granted. You go around, everyone you know has got 30 pinball machines at their house. But
it disappeared for me from. I reckon it disappeared for me from. I mean, seriously playing. I reckon it disappeared. Probably 99. That's around when that Revenge from Mars came out, and the sort of whole business fell apart.
It did, that's right.
And it wasn't until the guy whose mortgage I semi-paid in $2 coins added me on Facebook, but he didn't have a profile picture. Then I finally figured out who it was, and it was the guy that used to run the pinball at one of the best spots in Wellington, which was Midnight Espresso, which is Simon. Which is how I ended up coming to these things with you guys. And so, is that renaissance sort of happened in the last few years overall? Are you noticing more presence of it, or am I thinking, pinball's suddenly around because I know you guys? But it seems to be it's sort of experiencing a resurgence right in the last few years.
No question about it. I mean, there's always been the sort of hardcore, and with me being out in Pukekohe, I was a little bit on the outer of a lot of the guys that you know now, because I was in Pukekohe, I sort of kept to myself very much. And but there was always been probably a hardcore of 10 or 12 people in Auckland who have had pinball machines at their house for 10, 20 years. But certainly, and since the age of the internet,
door. Ooh.
That was a soft blow.
That was very polite.
The
Or just shut, folks.
since the internet, obviously a lot easier to get hold of people now, and with Facebook groups and things like that. And you're also seeing what the big growth have really come since a lot of people our age, sort of in their mid-30s to even late 40s or early 50s, now have a lot of money. They also have a big house. They also have a games room. You can only play so many games of snooker before it becomes extremely boring. Yeah. So that's there's so many people who've just got one pinball machine. We'll just put a pinball machine in that corner. Hang on, we'll put another one in that corner.
And also, like, I think, like, you think of, like, Don Draper in Mad Men, the kind of 1950s. You become a man at, like, 25. I think there's a lot of us still wandering around with our baseball caps on sideways. Well, so you're kind of cashed up, but perpetually living your teenage years.
I've got an uncle who's 55, and he still goes to raves.
Where does he find those in Auckland?
No, Wellington. He's actually from Masterton, and he goes down to Wellington, and he's right into it.
So you've got an uncle who's a raver. I kind of do as well, actually. And you've got a younger brother who's one of the most well-known magicians in New Zealand.
He's the leading magician in New Zealand. I believe the secretary of the Variety Club.
Did he practice on you guys when you were kids?
He did. He was back in exactly around that time that I had the Space Invaders machines in my mother's house. Was around about the same time that he got his first magic set, which was one of those black plastic hats that you used to buy at Toy World. Really diabolical thing with a false bottom in it. Where you could pull a handkerchief out of it. And he used to go around and just 24 hours a day he was going around doing his magical tricks. And 30 years later he's still doing them. So
you've got a barn, and you've got a younger brother practicing his magic in one corner. You've got your uncle furiously raving in another corner. You've got pinball set up. And the band's rehearsing.
And the band's playing some hard rock music.
How'd the band? Did the band? I mean, obviously, you did it for fun, but was there plans to kind of take it anywhere, or was it a pub band, or was it a play for friends band, or a...
Well, back in those days, hey, we could have. We're talking again the late 80s, early 90s. So we got 40 guys in their 40s reminiscing about the 90s again. But I
have a feeling I've unfairly tagged my own podcast. I'm actually going to get critiqued based on something I pointed out.
You'll have to get that $5 guy to do you a new logo. Lewis's podcast, guys in their 40s talking about the 90s.
With their baseball caps on, sideways.
And still going to raves, stay at home, watch TV.
So the band, what was the band? Were you a covers band? Were you an originals band?
Back in those days, that was very much pre New Zealand on air and free money from the government. So to be honest, being a musician in New Zealand... Before that, you were really pushing shit uphill, to be honest with you.
Used to be in the, speaking of trade and exchange, used to be in the hobbies section, the musical instruments.
Oh, it was, very much so, and I used to buy all my stuff. At that same age, I had a full PA system, which was, I made my own, again, subs, and that was so expensive to buy. I got I got a book from the public library about how to make sound reinforcement stuff, and I bought some speakers from one of the big sound reinforcement companies around Auckland, made some big W bins out of plywood. You could hear these things like 5 miles.
And what
away.
were you guys playing?
So we would play very much in New Zealand. Our scene out our way was very much cover band and play the pubs. Yeah. And we were the biggest cover band out in our area, in the what you'd call the counties area. So we'd especially play a lot of the rugby. Back in those days, rugby clubs were huge.
Right. So you had to play big kind of pop covers and stuff as well.
Not so much. We're always a little bit more bogany than that. We always went towards the the Bon Scott, AC/DC, and a lot of the Angels, and your Jimmy Barnes and Cold Chisel sort of stuff. So very much what you'd call the rock sort of fare or
so
radio heritage.
You must have had a good, a really good vocalist to be that versatile with all those bands you're talking about.
Yeah, we did a lot of the Doors and that. So Bruce was our vocalist. He's still my buddy. He was over at my house last weekend actually. Yeah, and he was very much a Jim Morrison sort of style guy, and much to his horror, we used to try and make him sing the Axl Rose sort of Guns N' Roses stuff, which he wasn't really suited for. And in hindsight, it was a mistake to make poor old Bruce try and do that. But what did they say? The exuberance of youth. We would get out there and play, and most important, we'd leave all the Guns N' Roses songs to last, and everyone was so drunk no one would notice.
They'd be having such a go at singing it that his voice would get lost in a sea of people. Like
so, back in those days, when we played, especially at the Patamahoe Rugby Club and Bombay Rugby Club, and that we were huge. We'd get 300 or 400 people showing up to these gigs. And we did come and play in Auckland a few times at places like Cactus Jack's, but the Auckland scene was always a little bit sort of sterile, and people had to drive into town, so they weren't getting as drunk. And it was our music was really fueled by Lion Brown, Lion and
Just
Lion
at, just at the end of the era when it was socially acceptable to drink 4 cases of beer and drive into town.
And well, drive home, that's
Yeah.
right. Yeah, the amount of people that would crash on the way home from the Patamaui Rugby Club after every social, probably double digits. So that was pretty much where that band was at.
And so how long did that go for? A few years?
Probably 5 years.
Wow. And what, you just stopped because other things presented themselves?
Yeah, I sort of, at the end, it's sort of, like most bands, we had the original lineup for a long time, had sort of a few bass players come and go, but like anything, at the end of the day, it's sort of, the scene started changing a little bit, and everyone sort of felt it had done its course.
You get screwed by grunge, Dave.
No, we fully embracaced it. We used to play Teen Spirits,
because often
Nirvana.
when people say that around that era, things just changed.
That was very true for you hear metal bands and things like
Yeah.
that. Grunge came along, and they just if you listen to some of those guys talking, it's like they're stadiums one day and then the RSA the next day. That's how bad it was. It was just like falling off a cliff.
I love that footage in Some Kind of Monster when Kirk Hammett is just absolutely beside himself, ruined that he can't do a lead break in a song. It's such a sight of the times.
That's a great movie. The
James Hetfield now, it's like, have you ever seen a man have so much torture lifted from himself? He's like, he could almost be hosting a kids' TV show now. He's so he's so happy.
back.
I'm very happy for him, but I don't know if it's the greatest thing for the music not being fueled on, hateful anger, vodka and cocaine.
The new album sounds quite good. I've never been a huge Metallica fan, but the new album, from what I've heard of it, sounds like a bit of a return to the old days. But that's all good.
I hear that, but I don't know if I'm going to sort of bother. I sort of I left those guys behind so many years ago. I still kind of follow them. I still guess what's going on.
They were so huge, but we used to play a number of their songs off the Black Album in our sets. So like you had your Enter Sandman and Sad But True. We'd rip that out at the Patamaui Rugby Club, and the place would just go nuts.
So you must have gone through to. Having said that, you must have gone through to early '90s, about '93 when the
probably mid '90s, '95, somewhere around there.
And so how many pinball machines have you got by the early '90s?
Oh, back to the pinballs again, Lewis. Probably for the longest time, I sort of fluctuated around 4 or 5.
Yeah,
that was it. I sort of had for a long time. I just had the first one, then I got the second one, which was an F14 Tomcat, which would have been around probably 91ish.
Yeah.
And then after I had that for a while, I'd sold the first one because it wasn't really getting played. So out that went, and then I had 2 or 3. So you'd pick up the odd one in a trade and exchange, and very much most people who have pinball machines are either limited either by cash or by predominantly space, because pinball machines take up a lot of space. So you can't have a 1-bedroom apartment in the city and have 22 pinball machines.
I was thinking that before, because to give you an idea of the space of your games room out in Pookie, so if there were no furniture in here and we took this breakfast bar we're sitting out here, I mean, I'd really only... So I'm talking, this was just an empty rectangle. I'd probably only get 20 in here, wouldn't I, to squeeze? Would I even get that in? 10 on each side?
No, because of the angle, and you probably would get, if you took all the... you'd probably get about a dozen, 6 down there and 6 down there, I guess.
Is that all?
Yeah, I'd say so, because you want a bit of space to walk around. You've got to have 1,200 mil between them to take the glass on and off when they break down.
Probably need somewhere to sit down too.
You probably need a bed, Lewis.
Yeah,
that's
I don't know. There's
crucial.
always machines to sleep under.
Well, you can, but then you wake up in the middle of the night, bang, smack your head on the bottom of the pinball machines, and that's not going to be a pleasurable experience.
No, okay. So you had 4 or 5. When was the seal suddenly broken, or did you jump up suddenly to a huge amount?
Well,
the space thing. You said the money thing.
Well, when we moved, I sold that. I bought my first house when I was 20. My first house I lived in when we moved out of when I had my life partner, as it turned out to be, and now my wife.
Yep.
Fiona, and I bought my first house in 1992, which was out in Pooney, which was a nice old farmhouse on 1 acre, just a little bit 10 minutes out of Pukekohe. Yeah. And that had, again, the reason I bought that place was it had a big shed for the band to practice in, because the band was still going full steam at that stage. We're normally playing at least 1 or 2 gigs a week, normally 1 gig every week, sometimes 2. And the pinball machines were down in the basement of this house, so... And at that stage, I had a pool table, and what else do I have? That's probably at pool table and pinball machines at that stage, maybe a couple of Space Invaders machines. When I moved out of that house 17 years later, I had 25. So that was 2007, 2008.
And they're still coming from New Zealand?
Those were all New Zealand machines at that stage, yeah. So that was when I moved. I moved into a business park I was building at the time. I decided, we'll sell this house because we're going to build a new house sometime down the track. So we'll go and live in our industrial estate. So I was building a 12-unit industrial estate in Pukekohe. And so we went and lived in that unit. We were going to live in there for 6 months. We ended up living in there for 4.5 years. And the whole downstairs, which was 120 square metres, was filled with pinball machines.
So with all this talk of the business alongside the pinball, because you said on the most pragmatic level, it's like space, which makes sense, and also the finances to do it. Did you go to sort of business school or anything, or is this just the family genes from the old man's second-hand shop? Because it sounds like you just sort of you had a life of that wheeling and dealing, kind of chipping up.
That is.
I thought you mentioned something to me about architecture or something similar. Or?
Good segue there, Lewis. That was superb. My genesis. I'm going back to when I was a schoolboy. I was just very, very shy, very, very shy child, and when I left, when I was in sixth form at school, always been a high achiever. They wanted me to be, in primary school, they wanted me to be a teacher of all things. The teachers actually took me aside and said, we want you to become a teacher, which I thought was quite strange. This isn't standard 4. And I thought about it and I went, oh yeah.
Would it be very rewarding, but you probably have 2 pinball machines by now?
Well, I don't know, but I've always had a philosophy, whatever you want to do, you just be the best at it. So I'll be the best teacher, so I'll probably have 4 pinball machines. Which I always thought was quite strange, but I sort of thought, I didn't really like the idea of being sort of cooped up in a classroom, and little kids can be quite annoying at times, and even at that age I'd figured that out. So me and my mother had gone over to Australia at some stage, like you used to do back in those days. It was quite exotic to fly over to Sydney for a week or something. Yeah. And me and my mother and one of my brothers had gone over to Australia for the weekend. And or for a week, and when we're coming back, she said, "How about being a customs officer?" So I went, "Oh, that's interesting." And so I looked into it a little bit more.
That's oddly specific.
Yeah. Well, just we were just, what do you want to do? I had no idea what I wanted to do. I was a shy, reserved kid, and I had no idea what I wanted to do. So, how about being a customs officer? So I applied to be a customs. I found out about it, and it was quite good. It sounded like a good lark, because you got good money working for the government back in those days. And the job,
when half of New Zealand was a public servant.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, everyone in Pukekohe worked for the railways, and then they never showed up for work, and they all had free tarpaulins around the house. So it was, the customs was a good lark. You worked, I think, from memory, 6 weeks at the airport, then 6 weeks at the port, doing containers, then 6 weeks at the mail centre. So you were always moving around. The thought of being office and that just wasn't exciting to me at all. So that sounded quite good. So I applied for the customs department and actually got accepted. And so I went in for my first interview, and they said, "Oh, yep, all good. Thank you very much. You're going to do well." And I went, "Thanks." And then I get a letter in the mail. No emails back in those days. This is late 80s. Yeah. And it said, "Oh, sorry, we've due to our new quota system, we regret to inform you that you can't work here anymore," because they had that Labour government, which again was David Long, and that had implemented something where instead of everybody who worked at the customs department being a white guy, they had to have a specific amount of different Indians and Pakistanis and Tongans or whatever. So unfortunately Dave was on the outer, so I couldn't go.
That's kind of the quota system gone wrong, that you got a job given to you and then taken away.
3 weeks later I was thrown on the scrap heap, so that was off to a shit start. So I didn't have anything else to do, so I went down and started to work at the old man's second-hand shop.
I can't believe they did that. It's a great implement it, but you can't really get the people who are already in holding and say, "Actually, sorry."
Yeah, that's how I was set up. I can't remember the exact timeline because we're talking, 30 odd years ago now. But it was something like, "Oh, you're going to report on the 1st of May on the 1st of February for training or something," and then on the 25th or the 20th of December, I get a letter saying, "Don't bother coming."
So how does the sort of, from my understanding, the furniture thing's the big thing. So did that come soon after?
Well, so I went to work at the old man's second-hand shop, and of course I was so shy and so withdrawn that I still remember actively my old man, I'd be standing behind the counter and the phone would be ringing, and I'd just be staring at the phone, and my old man would go, "Answer the fucking phone," and I'm like, I was so scared I wouldn't even answer the phone, so nervous and I still don't like talking on the phone to this day, which text messages are the best.
A lot of people don't now.
No, the best.
I've got a friend who leaves voice messages. I'm like, who leaves a message these days? I already know you called. You're just going to say you called. I'm going to have to ring my voicemail to find out it's you saying you called.
I had to tell my old man, stop leaving voice messages. I know you called.
That's right. It's not 1998.
I know I have to phone you back.
Yeah.
So eventually I got over all that, but honestly, working in the second-hand shop went from being almost a shy, reclusive nerd, which is probably overselling it a little bit, to be honest, but to being an outgoing-ish sort of guy, and
flipped a few waterbeds on top of the world.
Yeah, that's right. We never really did waterbeds; they're always a pain in the ass. But that's our second-hand shop was very very much about furniture. So that's where the whole furniture thing came from. But learning one thing about the second-hand shop was you would deal with everybody. So from all genres of
all walks of life.
All walks of life. That's the word we're looking for. Yep. And so we'd be dealing with the the rich guys in town, and then the once warriors type guys. And so really, really, really good. It's probably the best training that you could ever have for the walk of life, if you like, was working in a second-hand shop and dealing with all these people, because it taught you how to relate to people.
And it taught you there's not just one Auckland, there's like 50 Aucklands.
Oh, definitely. I remember I was talking about this the other day, and I was reminded I was listening to the Jim Florentine podcast the other day, and he was talking about Once Were Warriors, the movie. And I remember going with one of my mates to the Once Were Warriors movie in Manukau, and 8 o'clock on a Sunday night from memory, and the place was packed out. It was the biggest hit in New Zealand, and it was predominantly white middle-class people. And coming out of the cinema, and everyone was just shocked, like they'd never ever seen anything like it. They just, they couldn't believe their eyes. And me and my mate were just like, yeah, we were seeing that sort of stuff on a daily basis.
That's right. I've been delivering shelves there.
Well, in the old days, we used to do. People would get a social welfare grant for a fridge or something, and so that was fair enough. They needed a new fridge or whatever. So you'd deliver the fridge around, and the $400 fridge or whatever. Oh, where do you want your fridge? You want it in the house? Oh, no, just leave it in the garage, bro. Yeah, no worries. So we put it in the garage. And then as you're pulling out of the driveway, the other second-hand shop's coming into the driveway to buy the fridge to buy it for $300 or whatever. And so they can go and buy some tinnies or whatever. That's the way it used to work. And probably still does, I guess. But
wheeling, dealing. So I want to get back to pinball in a second. So I'm just interested because from what you've told me, or is that where that sounds like, I don't know how much you pry around business, but it sounds like you guys were financially that was very successful. Right? Well, the furniture thing. So what was it? I mean, there's furniture galore. What was it that you guys did that really kind of set you up?
Well, very much. It was always a Pukekohe based thing. So
it was importing furniture, right?
Well, that was later on.
Right.
I mean,
okay.
Our family. It was always a family business out in Pukekohe, and we did our thing, and that's where really the success came from. Was I bought my father out when I was 30, and I bought him out. He wanted to retire.
Yeah.
So I bought him out, and I had to pay for it. Didn't get it for free or anything. But I did have the advantage. He let me pay it off, which was very nice of him. Because to be honest, I don't think a bank would have given me a loan. And so he let me pay it off. I paid full market price for it, so no favours for Dave.
Yeah, I think that's good family.
It is, yeah. And fair enough. He'd worked hard for 20 years, so you don't want to begrudge him that. And so I bought it all off him, and then I expanded the business. So it was at that stage, it was still me. I had about 6 or 7 staff, and we went more and more into new furniture as well as the second-hand stuff, because so the new stuff started to take off, and that's where my Best Buys furniture came from a few years down the track. So I had the 2 buildings in Pukekohe right next door to each other. One was the Pukekohe Trading Post on one side, and then I had Best Buys next door, which was the new furniture side of it. And eventually, because I'd been doing the second-hand stuff for 20 years, eventually I knocked the second-hand shop on the head and sold it to someone else, and they moved it to a different building, and Best Buys had 20,000 square feet of new furniture. So it was just one outlet. Was just one outlet to start with. It was just me and Pukekohe, to start with.
I would imagine after that was a success. That's when you sort of began to have the means to get more and more machines, and you pretty much said that New Zealand, I'm guessing, was farmed out fairly easily because there was only so many machines brought in.
Mm-hmm.
was it pre-internet that you started to get them from overseas? How do you even begin to like figure out how to get these huge? It's a bit different to trying to get a record from San Francisco, you know. So how did you cotton on to getting these things over and finding them and stuff?
Well, in the old days, I suppose I was an early adopter of the internet, so going back to Windows 95, I guess, Windows 98.
Yeah.
We're on the internet, so there's
40 minutes to load a news group page.
Well, very much so, especially living out in the country where I lived. It was 56k modem and probably 10k if you're lucky on the phone lines, which is still very much like that. Living out in the country, we don't have any fibre optic out in the countryside, and I'd bought up a lot of machines. I think most up to that stage, I probably had about 40 new machines which I'd bought from around New Zealand. Yeah. And all the pinball people in New Zealand used to always rag me because in those days pinball machines weren't worth what they're worth now. So I very rarely used to pay over $1,000 for a pinball machine. So that's
after the sort of bottom fell out of the actual industry of having them in sites and stuff when they stopped manufacturing and so on. There was a period where they were perceived to be not worth a lot. Am I right? Is this early 2000s?
Yeah, early to late, even to late 2000s. Or
wow, so that's not that long ago.
Not that long ago. You're talking sort of 10 years ago. Yeah. You could still pick up a decent title for $1,000 to $2,000. But I turned down a lot of really nice machines back in those days because they were $2,000 or $3,000, and it was like, God, who'd spend $5,000 on a pinball machine? And now some of them are $15,000. You know, times they have changed, but. They back in those days, $1,000, $1,200 was very much the norm. So
how are people finding you in New Zealand if it was pre-internet and so on? If you said you had machines that people were coming to you for and stuff,
in regards to,
I thought you said that people were coming to you when you had 40 or 50 at one stage, and you were starting to buy and sell here and stuff.
Well, not so much. I was buying them. It's more that later on we got into. I bought in some containers from Europe of pinball machines, via the internet. Yeah,
via very early, slow, excruciating internet.
Probably a little bit faster then, because around that time that I was living in the business park, so late 2000s, 2009, 2010. Yeah, I bought in the first container of pinball machines from Europe, which was 36 machines, and kept some of them and then sold them. Through the business and sold some. So then at that stage, Trade Me was around, so we could put them on Trade Me. And I say we, I'm talking about me. And
it's the royal me.
Yeah, that's right. Whereas I would put them on Trade Me and sell them off, and that's obviously that was the genesis of most of the people.
Oh, so I only met you just after it went completely ridiculous.
Very much so, yeah.
So you must have you suddenly got an extra 60 or 70 machines in a year or two.
Yeah, that's very much.
That sounds like an exciting couple of years.
That's sort of.
That's like I get excited when a courier package the size of this water bottle arrives, let alone.
After you've got 40 or 50, another one's just like, oh, where's that going to go, sort of thing. But it's it was a little bit like that. And I did most of those container pinball machines have gone now, so I bought in a couple of containers of those. So you're talking about 70 machines, and I've still got some of them, but probably got half of those, I guess, and sold the other half off.
I just love so many different aspects. I could go on for days about all the different reasons I like pinball, and I'm sure people collect them for a lot of these different reasons. There's like the pop culture side of it. There's the admiring the mechanical development side of it. There's the actual gameplay side of it. There's the the physical gameplay, the storytelling gameplay, and so on and so forth. What kind of appeals to you about them? Is it all of the above?
Well, I'm more like...
There's probably other categories too. Yeah, they weren't off a list, folks.
Those ones, there is obviously that the aesthetic version, look of the pinball machine.
The fact they're a part of history.
There is that side of it, but my side more. I'm always approach it from a player's side of it. So some people might like the look of a machine, but I always like the playing of the machine.
So most of those games in that collection, you like it. Basically, I'm not sure there's no hard and fast rule, especially when you've got so many. Mm-hmm. But basically, like if you don't enjoy playing them, they don't last long in there unless there's something really special about them.
That's right. Yeah. Then if it's not a good player, then it's the first one out the door. That's right. And even though I've got a rather large room now with a lot of pinball machines in it, I'm at overflow now. So in the last couple of months, there's been 10 machines go out. So you wouldn't notice that they've gone, but they have.
Oh, I do notice things come and go. Yeah,
things come and go.
I do a little audit, a little Lewis audit every time I'm there.
Where's that thing going? Oh, I used to like playing that. Well, stiff shit, it's gone.
Yeah. So you must be a fan of... Sorry, I cut you off. You must be a fan of then, if you've bothered to collect all the System 11s, for folks listening, that's vaguely machines produced late 80s that have got the what are they called? Not
Alphanumeric.
matrix, alphanumeric. I was trying to remember that the other day.
Displays, that's right.
Or as I called it, the old school calculator screens.
Yeah, calculator screens.
So that's a particular favourite era for playability. It's not just a nostalgia thing. You think they were the killer machines?
Out of those, there was 30 System 11, and System 11 refers to the board sets that they use inside the machines.
Yeah.
And they were made by Williams Electronics between the years of 86 and 91.
Which is when I really started seriously. It's when I could cough up the 60 cents instead of the 20.
That's right, and that was very, very much with me. And that's also that era also coincides with the relaxation of the import laws, and so that's when you started to see a few more of those machines in New Zealand. So,
but it also corresponds with, and you can shoot me down completely if I've got this wrong. It also corresponds with the gameplay, the software side of the gameplay coming up a level as well.
No.
With there being sort of beginning of modes and all that sort of business.
You are correct, Lewis. Yeah. And the before 85, a lot of
it was how can we increase these mechanically?
Well, more electronically, more so than anything, is because the computing power just simply wasn't there. I mean, you're talking the electronic machines that were made between 1977 and 1986, like the ROM chips on them are 16K. That's sort of all you could put into a machine. So you were very limited into what you could do. You could still have good fun and hit a spinner and whack the ball around, but as far as sub modes and exciting things like that didn't really kick off until the System 11 board set, which came in 86.
Hey, I think I got about 5 solid years of nearly daily enjoyment and gameplay from a Commodore 64. I think a Word document's more than 64K these days.
Yeah, exactly right. I remember my first ever computer. I was very lucky in the fact that even though we grew up, we had a very basic upbringing, and with my father sort of starting from nothing, but he was always keen to give the kids a head start.
Yeah.
The opposite. No, he still doesn't even know how to turn on a computer. I had to show him how to turn on a smartphone. I bought him a smartphone a couple of years ago, and he still treats it with some disdain. But
just keep leaving those voice messages there.
Yeah, that's right. Just keep leaving. I will give you a ring back. I promise.
Yeah.
He was always wanted to give us kids an advantage, and he was clever enough to know that computers were a thing of the future. So he spent $1,000 on a Sinclair ZX81,
which is about 3K.
Yeah, well, I think standard they are 1K, and then you used to put the 16K little pack in the back.
Hang on, I got something for you. Keep talking.
Oh no, he's going to get one. Look out. And these things were. He's got. I had this exactly the same manual.
I thought you might not have the programming manual.
I do.
After all these years.
I'm a king of Basic. I actually made my own Donkey Kong program in Basic.
Wow. Go to 10.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say.
Poke 53280.
Line 320. Yeah, go to 20 or go sub 20.
If B equals or whatever it was.
That's about where my computing, apart from making websites, that's about where my computing knowledge starts and ends there.
Sorry.
No, I forgot. I see. My father was nice enough to get us a ZX81 because he was clever enough to know that computers were the way of the future. But the ZX81, if you tapped the back of it, like if you dropped it, you'd be halfway working through making a Donkey Kong program, and if you tapped the memory pack or anything, the whole thing would just crash and die, and you'd have to start all again.
They had those like like if you find the oldest ATM machine on the block these days, they had those for the keyboard buttons.
Yeah, the rubber keyboard buttons.
So back to the pinballs, to getting them in and stuff. Because I asked you, what is it you like about them and so on. And another thing that fascinates me when I see all those machines at your place or anywhere is, a part of me kind of wishes they had either a sort of what would you call it, an ownership title like a house or whatever, so you could trace them back. Or if everyone had just decided 20 or 30 years ago to scratch their name and location on them at the bottom, like there must be some stories behind some of those machines. And with that. Before I let you go on, is with that, like, are most of the games you got there, are they from overseas now? And what's some of the more outlandish places you've found them and managed to? Because New Zealand's a long way away to get anything, man, even these days. So what's some of the more outlandish locations or whatever you've rescued machines from?
One of the machines I'm doing up at the moment, the genesis of all pinball machines, pretty much all of them, the American brands, all made in Chicago. So you've got your Stern, which was Data East and Sega, and still trades as Stern today. So all the pinball machines you see around New Zealand now, the new ones are all Sterns. They're made in Chicago. Bally Williams were all made in Chicago. The Gottliebs were made in Chicago. So pretty much all pinball machines were generated around Chicago, and I'm doing up one machine at the moment, which I'm doing a full restoration on, which is a Creature from the Black Lagoon, which is a nice classic 1993 game. And that machine had gone from Chicago to Tokyo. It's got the Japanese 110 volt kit inside it, so it runs on.
Oh, so you just deduced that by what's inside it?
Yeah, so it's still got Taito stickers on it. They were the Japanese importers, and then it went from there to Europe. Someone in Europe, after pinball they were trendy in Japan for a few years, and then they weren't. So all the Europeans bought them. So then it went to Europe and went to Germany because it's got Germany coin mechanisms in it. And then I bought it. Now it's in New Zealand. So it's been.
So you can. What I was talking about, you sometimes can trace them just by where you got them from, and a few little clues and stuff.
That's right. Yeah, those are the sort of clues on that one. Usually you can tell where they've been by the coin mechanisms and what coins they take. Yeah, it'll normally say on the door where they've. If you walk around my place, most of my ones say New Zealand dollars, but the ones I've bought them from America have still got 25 cent, on them.
Oh, so despite going back about half an hour to what you're saying about the restrictions of Muldoon era in New Zealand and so on, a lot of more than let's say half your machines actually were from New Zealand when you bought them.
That's right, but they were mainly the 86 and onwards machines. So those older machines, which are in the back half of my collection, the older.
And what about without ruining because there'll be other collectors again. They'll be sitting there with the pen and paper, man. What are some of the more oh my fucking god, I can't believe I found this here moments, like the I'm just making this up. Obviously, the 80-year-old who's kid left a pinball machine in their garage 15 years ago, or anything like any of those sort of.
They haven't really. No, to be honest, there isn't.
So you don't think there's a bunch sitting through New Zealand with blankets over them in the back of suburban houses?
Every now and again you'll get something like that, but not very often. I mean, because they are a reason. Even if they're only worth $1,000 or $2,000, that's still quite a lot of money. So. It's not like like a stamp that's sitting on an envelope somewhere. And
I think with the advent of again the internet, which has changed so much in our lives, even the absolute Luddite of whatever it is you're talking about, people can quickly find if there's money in their garage, can't they?
Exactly right. So if they go, exactly. These days, what people do, the modus operandi for people is, I've got this Street Fighter pinball machine in my garage. Oh, yeah, I suppose I should really get rid of that. I bought it for $500, 10 years ago. What's it worth now? The first thing they do is go onto eBay, and someone's selling one in America for $10,000 or something ludicrous. And so they put it on
that's like on Discogs with records. This record's worth $400. I'm like, no, it's not worth $400.
Exactly.
Some idiot has listed it for $400, and it's going to sit there for 4 years for $400.
It's not what they're asking for. It's what they're selling for. So eventually, after 3 months on Trade Me of it going from $10,000 to $8,000 to $6,000 to $1,500, it actually finds its price of $1,500. Which
so for someone who wanted to, someone who's listening now, because every time, I'll say it again. It was especially I became, I really started putting money in them from my uni years through to a few years after that. So let's say 94 to about 99. Me and Jez, who you've met, were pretty much. If there was a pinball in Wellington, we were playing it. Mm-hmm. And, so as a result of that, a lot of my Facebook friends are from that era in Wellington and stuff. And there's often, excitement around the fact I've found a bunch of people up here with machines that you can play. So for someone wanting to get into collecting pinball machines and stuff now in New Zealand, or even owning one or two, do you guys have Trade Me on lock? Like, do people ever... Because I just now have met you all, I'm like... I'm sure you guys all talk about what prices things are going with. So does one ever slip through to another collector? Or?
Well, I would say that would be how the majority of pinball machines in New Zealand would sell. Would be that one of the guys would say, hey, if you want to sell that machine, give me a call. Yeah. That's normally how it works. Unfortunately, normally you give them a call and they say, I haven't got any money or I haven't got any room. But most of the pinball machines would sell like before they hit Trade Me. Not always, though. I mean, I've sold a dozen on Trade Me probably, like I say, in the last 2 or 3 months because I was out of room. So Trade Me is a good way. The only thing is you want to go in like anything you're into, whether it be cars or computers or records, or you want to go in there with a little bit of knowledge, so you don't go and buy the first pinball machine. We've seen a few on Trade Me sell
for ridiculous amounts.
Literally twice or 3 times what they're worth. Yeah. And that's cool if you're happy to pay $3,000 or $3,500 for a Street Fighter. Then that's good. Have some fun with it. But when you turn around and go to sell it, don't be surprised if you get $1,500 for it. That's actually what it's worth.
That era, if what Simon tells me is correct, is like there used to be just 1 or 2 reps who would look at I don't know what you call it, the title card or the promotional card for the game, and they'd decide how many should come into New Zealand. So you did have mistakes made, right? You had they brought in way too many Street Fighters for the market.
Yep.
And then stuff like, anyone listening to this who knows me in pinball knew that Attack from Mars was going to come up at some point. Simon tells me that they basically ordered bugger all of those, and it turned out to be a game that a lot of serious players like myself, and Jeremy kind of spent a lot of money playing. So, I don't know. Do you reckon there'd be a few Street Fighters on landfills by now? Did that happen? Did that happen to a lot of games? Did a lot of them just end up on landfills?
Well, yes. I think in New Zealand they've always been scarce enough that no doubt there have been some that have been ended up in landfills, but I think in New Zealand they've always had a value, and they're a little bit thinner on the ground. So certainly in America, I've seen pictures of piles of hundreds of pinball machines and Space Invaders machines being torched.
How's that flood in when they set up that pinball museum?
That's
what's the film? Not Tilt. Whatever the film is.
Is that when Papa
harrowing.
Gets flooded?
It's harrowing. He's just got it set up, and then it's like.
Yeah, that's where they have.
I think it's more machines in your collection.
It is, yeah. That's the Papa collection. I think in that I was there last year. This year. No, this year I was there. That's over in Pittsburgh, and unfortunately, it is right next to a creek. And it's an old industrial factory building, and I think there's about 300 machines in there, I think, maybe 250. There's a fair few. And that's where they hold the PAPA World Championships, and PAPA stands for Professional and Amateur Pinball Players Association, or something similar to that. And unfortunately, a flood went through the place and flooded all the machines. So all those machines basically had to be just chucked in the fire. They were all rubbish, but they took all the playfields and that out of them, kept some spare parts. But they were lucky enough that they were able to...
It's not really much of a consolation, though, is it?
Not really, but the beauty in America, and especially around that Pittsburgh area, around that East Coast, there's a lot of pinball machines. So within 12 months, the guy had completely rebuilt his collection. And a lot of machines were donated, and money was donated, and got it back up and going again. And
okay, so, I mean, you wouldn't know the answer to this, but just if you could have an educated guess. I sort of, from what I heard from a few people, it felt like, maybe less than half the world's pinball machines that have been produced are still on the planet. But you're saying there's still a lot of machines, probably more machines preserved than have been scrap heaps. How would you answer that? You wouldn't know,
no,
would you?
There's no way of...
I suppose there's things like international, what's it called? The pinball database says how many were produced, and then...
That's right. I would say half would be gone. I would say that would probably be right, especially in the old days. I don't know so much about New Zealand, but in America, there's a lot of stories about you'd have operators in towns, because at the end of the day, pinball and Space Invaders,
all about making money.
It's all about making money, and a lot of collectors sort of forget about that pinball machines were made no different from a pokie machine or a gambling machine to get money in them. That's what they're for. They're not to sit in Dave's house.
Yeah.
So. Although that's where they've all ended up, but so say in Chicago in the 1970s or 80s, you'd have Lewis would be the biggest operator in Chicago, and when it came to the end of a machine cycle, or it wasn't earning any more money,
it's just filling space. It
was filling space, and he didn't want to sell it to Bob because he knew that Bob down the road would put it in the pub down the road and start taking his revenue. Yeah. So what else could he do? Just smash it up and either just burn it or use it for parts. So a lot of machines did get smashed up and destroyed, which is that's a bummer. But
what do you think the rarest machine in your collection is?
I have. I've got you've seen my big Hercules, which is
that's a bit personal.
Well, and you've seen my pinball machine.
Yeah.
For the listeners, I've got a pinball machine called a Hercules, which is a Atari, when Atari started making pinball machines for a few years.
And to give you a clue about what's different about it, it's got a pool cue. What do you call it? The pool ball.
A pool ball is the pinball. Yeah. So it is like 4 times the size of a normal pinball machine. So the quantity of those made is somewhere between 200 and 500, but no one's quite too sure. Some people swear on 200, some people say 500. So I think that's the rarest one I've got. The other one that I've got, which you played, which have just arrived, which you played last weekend. Yeah. My America's Most Haunted and my Rob Zombie, which are made by a little boutique pinball company. Excuse me. Based in Benton.
Good effort by them. I think they were great first machines.
And great guys too. I've met them all. And they're based in Benton in Wisconsin, which is just up from Chicago. And so the America's Most Haunted was their first machine, which is programmed by a guy that some of the listeners might know called Ben Heck, who's one of the very, very first guys on YouTube to have his own YouTube channel. And do the Ben Heck Show, which is a tech show regarding, hacking Xboxes and things like that.
Yeah.
Real bit of a nerd thing. So he made America's Most Haunted from start to finish. Everything
Wow.
did the woodwork, did the
Wow,
programming,
so everything, the coding and the
graphics, even the music,
the ramp design, the physics,
all the ramps and that were printed on his plastic printer, so that you see in his video. And then they decided to put it into production, and that's where Spooky Pinball was started by Chuck Emery. Or Charlie Emery, up in Benton, Wisconsin. So there's 150 of those machines. So that'll now be my rarest machine, and the Rob Zombie
Why
machine.
is it your rarest? Because they're not going to bang out another 30 on to demand. That's
only 150 ever made. That's it.
Cool.
That was the first one. They said, "Hey, we've got the capacity to make 150 machines. So we'll stop it at that."
I like the sort of, not the modesty is the wrong word, but I like the realistic goals of that. It's sort of a passion project. They've managed to flick a few off, and then maybe they'll increase runs. Because we're probably going to have a mix of people who we probably haven't gone deep enough with talking about pinball today, and then people who are curious about pinball, like I say, from back in the day, because I've specifically brought up how to buy a machine and stuff. It must be pointed out, dear aspiring pinball reconnecting listener, that even since I've kind of reacquainted with pinball in probably the last 5 years, there's not only Stern producing games, but there's all these little startups everywhere. There's the Big Lebowski guys.
Yep,
that's
coming
all
out
they've
of
made.
Europe.
Yep. Did you look at that to buy?
Yeah, no, not.
I love the theme, man.
Yeah, not really my favourite film, to be honest. I'm a big film guy as well, and you see the cinema and that. I got it home, but
it's got a Kahlua and milk in it.
It has. It does,
and
indeed.
It's got a rug underneath it.
Maybe I'm not that much of a stoner that the movie didn't appeal to me. I don't know what that says about you, Lewis. But but I played the machine. The machine shoots nicely. The under playfield, and that's got a 10-pin bowling alley under the playfield, which you can see through a clear hole in the playfield, which didn't really do much for me. But it does look like a nice machine. It might be something I look at further down the track when they've actually made a few of them.
So what are they called?
Dutch Pinball. They're
so there's
based in
Dutch
Holland.
Pinball, there's Spooky Pinball, there's Jersey Jack, who've made, I'm talking new startups, folks. There's Jersey Jack, who've made Wizard Oz and a few others. There's Stern, who sort of hung it out all the way through. And then there's a couple other new ones, isn't there, as well?
No one else has actually made... Highway Pinball in the UK. They've made Full Throttle, which is a motorbike racing themed pinball. And they've got Alien coming out, which is based on the Alien movies with Sigourney Weaver.
Well, they're obviously serious if they've brought they've kind of brought into a franchise that big. So we haven't got too long to go. And what I really want to ask you about is, because you sort of said the large-scale collecting is relatively new in the scheme of things, but, you've played around 30 comps overseas. So I just wanted to ask you about that experience of, when did you start sort of getting, I guess, serious enough in terms of when did you even realise there was a sort of serious competitive scene still going, and how's that been going? What's it like playing overseas? There you go. There's 19 questions about the comps and playing overseas.
Knock them all ahead
I'll
in
leave
one
you
paragraph.
to it. Yeah.
The competitive scene in New Zealand is only really, I suppose, 5 years old now. I think it started about 2012, and that's when we first... IFPA, who's the International Pinball Flipper Association, because, ladies and gentlemen, pinballs are called flippers in Europe. Germans call them Der Flippers. Oh. Der Flippers. You go to play Der Flippers? Yes, we do. And so we touched base with them, and they were very, very keen to start to expand a little bit more. It had sort of had a little bit of a die out, the competitive pinball scene, in the late 2000s, mid 2000s, and it sort of jumped back into action again in the later 2000s. And I think off the top of my head, at the 2008 World Championships, I think about 30 people showed up. Now, these days, it's grown so much that they're having a pinball championship in July last year. They just put the tickets on sale 2 weeks ago, so we're talking, 8 months in advance. Wow. That's 700 spaces all sold out in 15 minutes. Yeah. So that's the sort of growth that you've had in competitive
there's
pinball.
a lot of us in the rankings on that website.
Well,
it's starting to get warm in here, right?
When we
haven't
first,
got long to go.
A little bit, Lewis.
I'm hotboxing.
You need an air conditioner. Yeah. When we first got into playing competitive pinball in New Zealand, which I think was 2012. I think there was 10,000 people on the IFPA who had an IFPA ranking. Yeah. Now there's 46,000.
Wow!
So that's the growth that there is. Yeah. It really has gone insane. I think in New Zealand there's about 400 registered players, of which I would think about 100 were were serious players, and 300.
How many of them amount in total in New Zealand, sorry?
400.
400. Okay,
400.
Yeah, that sounds about right, yeah.
Yeah.
So there's people who've turned up for comps and had a blat, maybe because they got a relative there or whatever. I think you got that feels about right, 100
so
400. And so when you're overseas, I mean, look, there are people in the New Zealand circles, or I've only really done Auckland, that are obviously serious about it, but there's still an air of relaxedness to the comps, especially because we're having them at people's houses and so on. Does the seriousness go up a level at some of the comps you've been to?
It certainly does. I mean, backtracking just a little bit, we got invited. They changed the World Championship structure in 2013 to become a little bit more all-inclusive, because pinball is huge in America. Competitive pinball, that is huge in America, and it's also very huge in Europe, especially in Sweden. Yeah. Sweden is crazy for pinball, competitive pinball.
Wow.
Yeah. So to stop because they have so many competitions in America. I mean, most of the people I know in America play 2 competitions a week. Here in New Zealand, we play 1 a month. So,
well, here in Auckland, you don't even do that in Wellington.
Yes. So rephrase that. In Auckland, we play once a month, and down in Wellington, I think they have every 2 months. And Christchurch is trying to do every month, but at the moment, they're probably every 2 months on average, I would think. So we're not. A lot of the guys in America play leagues like they would have in the old days. They would have had bowling leagues. Now they have pinball leagues, and so it's a good place to go on a Wednesday night. You'll go to a barcade, which is huge scene in America now. Go along to a barcade, have some your $5 craft beer, and play pinball all night. It's a real great night. It would have really suited you back in your university days.
But have you been staunched? Have you been sort of staunched out in the comps overseas or anything? Does it get quite cutthroat, or is it still a good scene?
Back to the 2013 again. They changed it so that the top 64 players in the world get together in either Europe or America every year.
Are you one of those?
Well, we sort of are now, because they've changed it so that 2 people from each country get an automatic entry.
Oh, wow.
So the top 2 players in New Zealand, the top 2 players in Australia, the top 2 players in America, France, Europe, France, Sweden, Norway, all the main pinball sort of playing countries get automatic 2 entries into it, because there's no way that we could make it into the top 64, because we just don't play enough competitions to get enough points. So that they thought that would be more all-inclusive if they did that, and it was a genius idea.
And so you said the we this time, but it's not the royal we, because I suppose you should explain to the uninitiated who the second best player in New Zealand is.
In the first one, in the very, very first 2013, the World Championships were held in just out of Frankfurt in Germany, which is where I saw that guy's 300 machines. This was done at
amongst the chicken
next to the chicken sheds.
Yeah.
It must be added that the chickens weren't in with the pinball machines. That was slightly more upmarket than that. But just down the road was where the World Championships were, which is a place called Freddie's Pinball Paradise, and he's got about 150 machines. Yeah. So we had the World Championships there, and the very first one I went, and BJ Wilson went, who's another Aucklander, and we went over there and proceeded to come sort of last because it was our very, very first sort of real event.
Well, you know what I mean? Comps here a lot.
We had no idea what the hell was going on, so I ended up coming 60th, and I think BJ came 64th out of 64. But which is, to be expected in the Australians that came with us, because it was their first big one as well. They did pretty much exactly the same. I think they were 61st and 62nd. So, but it was to be honest, a bit of a mindfuck, if you like that word. To go there and see all these people that you'd only seen on the internet before, who are real pinball wizards, even though I hate that term.
So it wasn't even that you didn't know the system; it was just that they were that much better than you.
Oh guys. Very much so, and also like I remember going back to my first motor race, because that's one thing. I used to race cars as well, which we haven't touched on today, but it's another podcast altogether. But you're just showing up there and seeing all these like rock stars of the pinball world, and you have to go and play them. You're playing groups of 4, and you go around. Every round of pinball you play with 4 different players. So one, you'll be playing with the world champion in one round, and the guy who was world champion 3 years ago. And the big disadvantage that we have in New Zealand and Australia is that these guys have been playing competitive pinball and playing in world championships for over 20 years.
Oh, so wow. So it never stopped,
it
even
never,
with the
lull?
Yeah.
Never stopped, no. So like Frank Bonner, who you've met, who's a French champion, who's been to New Zealand a few times, comes and stays at my house. He's competed in every world championship since, I think, 1992. Yeah. So it's nearly 25 years.
You know what's funny about you saying, that, you guys are good players, but I remember watching him in a final here, and just that makes a lot of sense. You told me that now, because I was just like, fucking hell, that's just some of the little manoeuvres and stuff he was pulling to stay in the game. It was next level. It was actually, not to take anything away from you guys, this is a few years ago, but I was like, wow, that's playing competition pinball.
That's right.
That is playing in a competition. You know,
very much so. Very much that next level of and that just comes down to 20 years of experience. You know, whereas we're talking 1 or 2 years of experience for us Kiwi guys. So it was very much lambs to the slaughter going over there and seeing that, but it was invaluable experience. And as we've gone on, the only downside for us is as we've gone along, we've got a lot better, but because of the upsurge in competitive pinball, so is everyone else. So in the old days, I would say that, like in those days, Frank was rated, top 10 player in the world. And now he's still in the top 100, maybe in the top 50. But there's so many. In those days, there was 20 or 30 people in the rankings that were better than everyone else. Now there's probably 200 people that are better than everyone else. There's so many people playing it, and there's so many people who are so good. So if you can go over there and like in the first round at the World Champs this year, which was in Pittsburgh at the Papa headquarters, I play the world. I think the world number 8 was in my round, the world number 5, and
what number are you? You haven't told us yet.
I was 80 in the world for a while,
man.
But because we haven't been playing a lot of competitions in New Zealand, I think I'm currently 130.
Yeah.
Last time I looked.
How many people registered on IFPA?
46,000.
Yeah.
So
well done.
Well, yes. Well, it would be. It's the sort of thing where if ranking really mattered, then you would move somewhere like Seattle or New York where they have competitions all the time.
Well, that was another thing I was going to ask you is, it's a lot of fun, but how kind of serious are you? I mean, are you travelling and stuff mainly for the fun, or do you really would you like to come out in the top 10?
Well, at the end of the day, I think at the, when you have your funeral and you die, the people are going to stand up. They're not going to say, hey, this guy was the number 10 pinball player in the world when he was 42. It's probably not something that's going to be raised at all. They can say, oh, he was a nice guy or he was a dick.
But for you, for me
personally,
doesn't matter what other people think, David.
For me, no, not at all. But I enjoy the competition. The number isn't really that important to me at all. Like I say, otherwise I would go and live in New York, or you'd go and chase it. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really mean anything.
But you're getting to meet a lot of very cool people in a scene you really love.
That's right.
And making more connections for machines and stuff.
Well, that's true. And also the pinball, for me, I have like one holiday a year, and I usually will base that around going to to Europe to play pinball, or America. Like this year was America, last year's Europe. This year, next
Denmark.
year, Denmark's coming up this year. Yep. 2015.
I'm getting a little more serious, Dave. I'm off to Wellington.
Yes,
for the
New
national
Zealand champs. You're in.
Yeah.
Yep. So and for the listeners,
for the listeners, I think I'm third. I'm in the 30s out of how many people there are in New Zealand.
The top 32 get to go and play in the New Zealand champs. So this is the third New Zealand champs. And
I think to be honest, I don't own a machine. I think that's okay.
It is.
Placing.
Yeah, that's good.
But I'll tell you what I've noticed is This is what I've noticed is I don't play as well in competitions, and I think there's something in that with just that ability of any good, I'm going to say sportsman, some people go, but any good competitive participant or player of something, and I had a little bit of a think about it. I think maybe it's because I was never really a sport kid growing up. I wasn't particularly good at sport and stuff. I still need to learn that ability better of playing in a competition like to the best of my ability, but not being affected mentally by the fact I'm in a competition. Like quite often I'll get knocked out really quickly at one of our monthly meets, and then I'll go off and play casually, and I'll smash every machine I just played. I just played against 3 or 4 other people. It's like my arms aren't all tight, and
that is a big thing. And there's really very few people that are natural at competing.
Well, I think all our greatest sports people must have that ability to just get that tunnel vision
of focus,
and that's what I'm doing.
It's very, very hard, and especially when you're playing with guys who are arguably better than you, whether it be at the World Championships or
But they can turn on that cool too. No, I don't mean cool like Fonzie, Joe cool, but that's exactly what we're talking about.
And
maybe I should get a Valium prescription for these. I don't know.
Well, maybe a little bit more laid back. I don't know. It's very, very hard
but Frank's hardly laid back.
No, but he's been doing competitive pinball for over 20 years, so it is a mindset, and it's getting used to playing with people and getting used to the people you're playing with and doing your best under pressure. Like, perfect example of that, I had 3 games in Metallica yesterday, and every single game was 250 million, which is a good score on Metallica. Yes, bang, 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 250, 270 million, which is a really good score. But we played competitive in the finals of that the competition we had at my house last month, which was the Pukekohe IFPA Classic, which we hold every year, and I played in the final of that, and I think I was lucky to get cracked 30 or 40 million. So the pressure's on. You definitely play differently.
Plus, there's another whole podcast in this. There's that for me, there's that untold joy which would be a given to most pinball players from now or in the past. That exact thing with pinball, where like going back to Donkey Kong or whatever. If we were having Donkey Kong championships, then all the good players would do roughly the same. There'd probably be a level or a life or two in it, but you've got good old physics and the luck and chance of that. I think there's something that can't really be emulated with video gaming there, eh?
No, that's sort of... Well, if you watch King of Kong movie and those guys that are learning those games, they're very much mathematical minds, and they memorise every map. You can't memorise pinball. Well,
I watched a Nintendo Tetris Championship doco the other day called... it's got a great name. It's like the Bliss of Perfection or something. And there's one particular level that the best players in the world can get to, and there's one final score they can get to, and there's only one person in the world who's on video being recorded doing both. Hey, we're nearly out of time. So we didn't mention who the number 2 player in New Zealand is.
We haven't. So after 2000,
I tried to coax that out of you before.
Yes. So after 2013, my daughter started playing again. She hadn't really had a lot of interest in playing pinball, although I've got pictures of her playing pinballs in her nappies when she was a baby back in the old days playing, which is the...
She's full immersion. We don't have many full immersion these days.
She is very full immersion. Yeah. So my daughter Daniela, who's 14, she is the number 2 ranked player in New Zealand, and she's also, last time I looked, the 5th ranked junior person in the world, which is very good considering that we live in little New Zealand.
Yeah.
And she's also the number 9 ranked woman player in the world.
That's amazing.
Which is pretty cool, yeah.
To her, do friends from school just go, what? You do a what? You do a which with a what now?
A little bit, but then again, no different from other kids might do ballet dancing or, belly dancing for that matter. Every kid's got their own little thing they do these days, and the kids will all come around. She'll have friends around, they'll all go and play a few games of pinball, and they get into it.
Yeah.
There's a couple of her friends from school, one of the boys from school who's one of my mate's sons who goes to school with her. They were at the last competition you were at. He's 14 years old, and he comes along, has a bash every now and again, and does reasonably well for his experience.
And so, a couple more things. Sorry, don't worry, you've got plenty of time for your parking.
No worries, Lewis.
We sort of talk business and money and stuff today, and that side of it's not so important to the playing them. But for people wanting to get into a pinball machine these days, maybe this is a how long is a piece of string kind of a question. But what is sort of a fair price for someone wanting to get, let's say, a machine from that era in the 90s when there were lots of machines around? What are machines kind of going for now? Because I know there'll be a lot of people listening to this who, like I say, haven't played for 10 or 15 years. I've seen them on my Facebook page, and I've had a couple of friends independent to our scene, like you say, who've come into money through hard work, who've got 2 or 3 minters at their place now, but there's a lot who kind of haven't. So what do we need to invest in it to get a machine these days?
I get so many emails from guys who are our age, that's late 30s, mid 40s, and they'll send me an email and say, just identical story to yours, Lewis, where they'll say, hey, I went to university in Otago, and I used to play at, Tales of the Arabian Nights and Addams Family. I'd really like to have one of those for my games room now. How much does one cost? And I tell them $8,000, and if I get an email back at all, it's like, holy shit, $8,000. But unfortunately, because
these are the ones that would have been under 1,500 in the early 2000s.
Not particularly those titles, but they were always that little bit more, $3 or $4 grand. But certainly they're $8 now. But the older machines were certainly $1,000, yeah, that's for sure. And the problem is with a lot of people these days is that they will, no different from collecting anything else, is they'll want those premium titles. They're not happy to buy something that's $1,500. You can have just as much fun on a Street Fighter. Yeah. This is the most references Street Fighter pinballs ever got on a podcast ever. Yeah. But $1,500, hey, for $1,500 you can have a lot of fun on a Street Fighter pinball. It's not. Yep. It's not the world's best game.
We don't want to hurt Errol. We don't want to hurt Errol's feelings today.
Well, Errol's the world's number 1 Street Fighter pinball machine. So shout outs to Errol out in
Advocate. Pinball machine advocate
out East Tamaki way. Yeah. So, but especially if you're into Street Fighter like he is, he loves this whole Japanese manga stuff. Then it's it's pretty cool. And
when I watched that Tetris doco, I went on a YouTube rampage and watched a whole lot of full length video game and pinball machine docos, and I watched the 25th anniversary Street Fighter doco. I mean, it's made by the Street Fighter people, so hello. But it made me realise, shit, that is a large part of pop culture for about 20 years
Very much
of
so,
people.
yeah.
Hey, before you go, do you want to do the awkward satchel of segues?
I love a segue, Lewis.
Okay,
So,
just
let's
behind the computer there. Well, 2 of these are written by listeners.
I heard that in your last podcast.
Okay, what's that say?
The awkward satchel of segues.
Shall I read out who it's from?
Okay, that one's, I can see at the bottom, that one's very weird. And I didn't write that.
From Annabelle. If you had to eat one, what would you choose? A guide dog or a talking monkey?
Where do you go with that?
Well, it depends how hungry you were. The obvious answer would be neither, but if you had to choose, if you were starving, then be whichever one would be easier to catch, I guess. If you were on a desert island, then the guide dog wouldn't probably have much use. And what's the talking monkey going to tell you that you don't already know? So, yeah, I'd be cool with either of them.
That's what I wrote that down and I thought, how is someone going to answer that? You've done very well. And now I think about it, now I'm put on the spot. You know, on a most sort of practical and pragmatic level of actually, I guess, finishing it before you consume it. Perhaps. Oh no, actually, no. The dog isn't blind. Sorry, I thought the dog was blind, but it's not. It's leading.
Then it would be the blind
people
leading
around.
the blind.
Yeah,
that's
right. So,
guide dog would possibly have more meat on it.
yeah,
than a monkey.
more meat and probably less lip. So that seems a really odd place to end, but. Thanks. What was her name? Annabelle?
Annabelle, yes. Thank you.
I don't know her, so that's a good thing in
Thank you
itself.
for your question, listener Annabelle.
Yeah, people are starting to pop up who I don't know, which is great. Hey, thanks for coming in. When's the next comp?
Good question. New Zealand Champs, I think, is the next one, which top 32 players in New Zealand will convene for the 3rd annual New Zealand Championships in Wellington this year on, off the top of my head, the end of 25th of January or something like that, 27th maybe. Whenever it is, and I think Lucky Lewis is snuck in there somewhere at number 32, I believe, or 30.
I'll have to go and check that. I think I'm okay, but then I think a number of people who are in that top ranking will probably not go down.
Yeah, that's
so
right. Not everyone can always make everything, so that'll be good. So poor old Dave's got to put his title on the line and see if anyone else can take it off. Might be time for someone else to step up and be the New Zealand champion.
Simon Hexton?
Yes, Simon's
we're looking
a
at
super
you.
great player. Step
Maybe.
up, Simon.